When it comes to filter placement and how that affects the flow in your aquarium, we've talked about hang-on-back filters. We've talked about the more common air-driven filter varieties and sponges, breeder boxes, and undergrabber filters. And we've talked about canister filters. Now, granted, this is all high level, but there's one thing that I left off on purpose because I wanted to do it individually, and that is another very popular air-driven filter, the Matten filter. Hi, everybody. Editor Bentley here. I know that the camera is a little out of focus in this particular video, and I apologize for that. So it's a little blurry. I just didn't have time to refilm this, otherwise I would have. However, the information is still great, and you should be able to see what you need to understand the concepts. So let's get back to talking about Matten filters. Hello, everyone. This is Bentley. We're back for another terrible art lesson with Bentley. We're going to talk about Matten filters. So I've drawn it a little different this time, as we're here with my bad art. So here we've got a normal side view of the tank, and then this is like a top-down view. This is going to matter more when it comes to the next orientation, but we're going to start with like your standard Matten filter, where you've got it taking off an entire side of an aquarium. These are most common with like 10-gallon, 20-gallon, 20-gallon logs. Some of your smaller tanks, although some people will go all the way up to like a 40-gallon breeder with some really big Matten filters. Now, of course, the big advantage is you have this huge area here in green. This is going to represent our sponge portion of the Matten filter. This gives you a massive surface area for your beneficial bacteria. Fantastic. Matten filters are wonderful. There's some negatives too, but we're not going to get into those necessarily when it comes to like maintenance and substrate, but maybe we'll do an individual thing on Matten filters later. But let's just talk about flow. In this, we have two different drawings here. Again, our top-down, I'm going to indicate with as if you have two outlets, because sometimes you'll have two, and smaller ones you're only going to have one output, and then we'll just discuss the differences. It's fairly minor. And then here, we can assume similar. So, much like whenever we are to put whether it's a canister filter or a hang-on-back, and hang-on-back is probably most appropriate here. When we have the standard arrangement where it's here to the side, our water flow is going to be coming out of a little jet lifter here. That's the big thing about Matten filters is that jet lifter, right? Where it's air-driven, but instead of just going straight up, we're directing it. And we could do the same thing with a standard sponge, but it's most commonly found in Matten filters. So we're going to have our water flow come across over here. It's going to deflect off the glass, come down until it hits your substrate, and then start moving its way back this way. That's the common flow, right? Very similar to a hang-on-back. But here's the critical difference. Even though we have this flow that's going to jet out this way, and we're going to have it come in multiple areas, assuming there's no blocks, the inlet is down here. So primary suction is going to be coming through the media down this way. However, because this entire area in front of the airlift tube is porous and allows water movement, unlike what's going to happen with a hang-on-back or a canister filter, where despite the fact that this isn't open, because this portion where our filter media sits, like a sponge, water, even though it's at lower rates, will come through basically every portion of this and will make its way down, right, even along the back, into the inlet, and then repeat the cycle. So the big benefit here is, even as the primary suction is down low, as this starts to get populated with detritus, and even if it does clog up, and normally you really don't clog up a Matten filter, it's almost impossible, you have more and more open regions up through here that remain more accessible to your water flow. Water is always going to take the path of least resistance, right? This is something that we learn when it comes to drainage, and if you're ever dealing with a house, like how you deal with water drains coming off of your roof for your rain gutters and stuff, you purposely make paths of least resistance to push water away from the foundation of your home. The same principles apply even when we're submerged in an aquarium. if this is all clogged up with detritus, say we haven't cleaned this thing in 6 months and we've got a massive guppy horde in this thing, right? You still have less and less detritus in these upper levels, so more water flow will pass through that area and bring more detritus steadily through the rest of our sponge media until it gets to the point of where they are all relatively uniformly clogged. And you're still going to have water flow, but more importantly, it's more like as more and more particulates get caught in the mechanical filtration down low, there's higher flow regions up higher and higher in that filter, and the water is going to inherently flow better in those regions, regardless of where that suction is initially pulling from, because the water itself is going to take the path of least resistance. This doesn't happen in more powered filtration. It will with a sponge filter, right? We talked about that before. And how this looks from a top view is really simple. If you only have one outlet, right, you're going to have the water jetting out this way, and it is going to slowly kind of disperse. So you would see like a pattern like this, right, before it hits this wall and then comes back around, so that the areas outside the actual outlet have the least flow. And in general, Matten filters and sponge filtration, air-driven filtration, is lower flow. However, it's still very effective water movement. And then when we have two, right, we're creating two of those. So all it does is similar to with a hang-on-back filter, the wider the outlet is, the wider the blade, if you think about it, of water moving across your tank, and the more you're going to see gas exchange and turbulence and movement at your surface. One of the big things that Matten filters are amazing at, as long as you maintain your water levels, is they create very efficient gas exchange toward the top of your filter, or top of your aquarium, because that jet lifter style naturally pushes the water and forces extra water movement in a linear fashion. Right, we're coming across the tank more so than having in a traditional sponge, right? Traditional sponge, we have our movement going upward. It's not being directed, and then it's kind of funneling outward and going out. And that water movement from the initial kind of kinetic force moves across the rest of our tank. But in the case of a jet lifter style like this, it is forcing that kinetic force, this ability to move water across the tank. And that is really fantastic for ensuring really good aeration, on top of the fact that you have air-powered filtration, which is naturally going to oxygenate your water really well. This just creates better gas exchange across the entirety of the top of the aquarium in this design. That's where Matten filters are amazing. Now, this is the basics, right? It's a similar circular flow to what we get in a hang-on back. The only difference is how the medium of filtration, the mechanical filtration of the sponge itself, affects flow rates. And what I more mean is that because this is porous and acts as the stop coming to our inlet, as it clogs up, water just finds extra paths to get to that, and it can make sure that you have a continuous flow almost regardless of how long you wait on doing your maintenance. Now, don't wait too long, of course, but let's talk about the other primary orientation here, which is a corner Matten filter. All right, so here we are with a corner Matten filter. Again, this is our top-down view. Usually it's in a semicircle. I've seen some other DIY designs rather than the semicircle here, but the semicircle is the most common one we're going to see. And keep in mind that in larger tanks, you certainly can have multiple corner Matten filters, one in each back corner, as opposed to only one. We'll briefly discuss that in a second, but from the side here, right, you've got this corner that's taken up, and you've got your outlet. And if we were looking at it this way, you would have a little void back here where the inlet tube is. I just sped draw this, so forgive me a little here. The big difference in how this affects is when we're going to start looking at this top-down view, right? Because the corner Matten is basically just the same, except for it's coming across the tank. So we're still getting this similar flow where it's coming across the tank up top, it's deflecting off of the side glass, coming down, back around in here. But again, you're going to have, you know, all these other areas of flow. Water movement's still going to occur because we have this huge area of porous surface for water to move through before coming to the intake down here. So you're going to have light flow through these upper areas. It's going to get pulled down into the intake and shot back around through the jet lifter. But the primary flow is going to be here until we start seeing clogging from the detritus buildup in the mechanical portion of the sponge filter, right? Same thing as when we did the side arrangement. The top is where this really changes. Typically, in a corner Matten filter, you only have one outlet. But because these are almost always pointed corner to corner, yes, you can arrange them differently, but it's really suboptimal. So let's talk about the arrangement that almost everyone sets up. When this flow is coming corner to corner, what's happening is this, right? You've got that water, and it is kind of dispersing a little bit in this big kind of like cone shape. But what happens is, when it hits this corner, it disperses in two angles, right? So you've got part of the flow that disperses this way, and part of the flow that disperses this way. And it's going down at the same time. So while it's coming down, it's also coming across the sides of your tank. And yes, this flow gets minimized, but what happens is you get flow throughout this entire portion of your aquarium, right? It's going to be less and less in through here, but you've still got basically two patterns of flow because of the way that the water is going to hit and deflect into this corner of your aquarium. This can be extremely good for getting more universal flow throughout the entire aquarium. The side arrangement will give you a little bit stronger flow across, down, and back. This will give you more even flow throughout the entirety of the tank. It's super minimal in that difference. But just understand that in the end, you're going to have your strongest flow in this dead center. But because it's deflecting in multiple directions, it's going sideways and down at the same time, the actual force of water movement is less, but the dispersion, the way that it circulates throughout the entirety of the tank and minimizes some of your super low flow or dead spots, as we sometimes call it, is higher. You have less dead spots in this style of an arrangement than a pure side-to-side Matten filter. The difference is tiny. Keep this in mind. Basically, Matten filters are really good at being an air-driven flow, but mimicking water movement like a hang-on back because it creates this large surface where water can move through the filtration media and eventually get back to our suction point with the inlet. And because, again, airlifting, inlet, and outlet are the same mechanism, highly oxygenated water. Again, we're creating lots of surface agitation in this style, creating lots of movement throughout the entire tank. Low movement, but movement, period. This isn't going to be something, if you're trying to build like a river system tank, you're not looking at air-driven filtration, right? But if you want to make sure that like bettas, guppies, some of your egg scatterers, maybe this is a breeding setup. These are phenomenal for breeding and raising setups. You want to raise angelfish or shrimp. Shrimp are freaking amazing with Matten filters, right? Because it creates this huge area that they can kind of constantly graze on, because despite the fact that there's detritus, there's also bacterias and microfauna and, all those kind of organisms, like your biofilms that shrimp will feed on, that constantly form in this media that are perfect for them. These are fantastic setups for a lot of our nanofish, especially if we're more breeding oriented. How does this change if we have a second filter over here, right? Because that might be the difference. So, well, you've only got one inlet, and the big side one you have two. What happens if you put a second one over here? Well, you get two of these flows, right? So then if you had a second one over this way, you get the you get this cross flow that's coming across the tank, and it's ricocheting right off of your glass when it deflects. And it's basically creating this gentle, continuous moving vortex of water throughout your tank. But because of that very gentle flow, you're affecting the whole tank softly. This is a way to think about it. That's the best part about a Matten filter. Where you would want to, if you start getting past your 20-gallon tanks, you start looking at like a 40-gallon breeder as an example, and you don't want to have the big sheet. Maybe you're trying to do something that's a little easier to do cleaning and maintenance on, or maybe it's a matter of having more swim space available. You don't want this big open cavity on the side of your tank, or maybe there's a visual aesthetic you're going for. Then having 2 corner mattens and something like a 40-gallon breeder, great. It's going to create good flow, but all be air driven. It's fantastic. Honestly, Matten filters are one of the best ways to get good flow throughout an aquarium at a low amount. Good, gentle flow throughout your aquarium to make sure water's kind of moving everywhere. Mattens are probably one of the best, and because they're air driven, they're super efficient. So, that's the basics. Yes, there are lots of arrangements. You could, in theory, point out of a corner matten, point it only this way or only that way. But it's similar to how we've talked about some of like the canister filter options, where it minimizes the movement. Say if you're pointing directly this way, you're minimizing a lot of movement on this side of your aquarium, right? And because Matten filters are air-powered and you're already dealing with such a gentle flow rate, what you really want to do is maximize the movement in the tank because it's gentle movement. It's not like a powered filter where it's pushing a lot of water. It's pushing water much more gently, but still creating good movement. And there's something to be said. If you really want to dig deep into the science, it's creating kind of a vacuum, and that's pulling water with it as it's pushing extra water out. We're not trying to go that deep. High level here, right? We're going for a high level understanding. But that's it. That's a guide to how Matten filters are a little bit different. I really wanted to talk specifically on Matten filters on their own, just because they're a little special. They're kind of like a hybrid between a couple of things, but they are fantastic in certain scenarios. So with that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of bonus to Filtration 101, where we've gone through how filter placement and flow patterns get affected based on the type of filter you're using and how you arrange its inlet and outlet, etc. If you haven't watched up in the corner now, it'll be the entire Filtration 101 series. I'll talk about chemical, mechanical, biological filtration, because there's those portions, plus all the different flow videos where we have drawn horrible art on my whiteboard in my fish room. So with that being said, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments down below. What did you learn from this video? After watching these videos, is there a type of filtration maybe you weren't as interested in and now you are? Or like something important you learned, whatever it may be. I love hearing that feedback from you folks. It's part of what honestly makes my day when it comes to doing this here fish tube thing. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on helpful tip videos like this, instructional things, and all sorts of other goofy, dumb things that my internet dumb brain comes up with. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.